Subscribe now and press the bell icon. Never miss an update.
Namaste. Kia ora te whānau. Good afternoon, family. Ko wai o. Who am I? Ko Ngāti Pākehā te iwi, ko Taupirita Mona, ko Waikato te awa, no Kirikiri roa, no Aotea roa aho, ko clinical psychologist kaimahi, ko Paul Whitehead taku ingoa. So what I've just said is introduced you in a way that we introduce each other to the men in our care, and this is a way that people traditionally introduce themselves. So essentially, if you break it down, it's a very abbreviated way of doing it, but it's my tribe, my ancestry, my mountain, and my river. So what I said was essentially my mountain is Taupiri, that's where I live. The river is the Waikato River in New Zealand, which is the longest river in New Zealand. I'm from a place called Hamilton, New Zealand, and I'm a clinical psychologist, and my name is Paul.
So kia ora and welcome. So ko waio, ko Taupiri, ko Prongia te Maunga, ko Waipata Awa, no Kirikiri roa aho, ko Jessica Hannah toku ingoa. So welcome, my name's Jessica Hannah, and like Paul, I'm also a clinical psychologist working for the Department of Corrections in New Zealand. I also live in a city called Hamilton, which is about an hour and a half from Auckland, which is the largest city in New Zealand. So as Paul said, how we've introduced ourselves is a really big part of our culture in New Zealand, and it's about forming connections with each other. So you'll share where you're from. So for me, my mountain is Prongia. It's where I grew up. Which place is special to me? You'll share that with somebody and you'll find out that they've got family there. They know people there. You build connections and relationships, and a big part of our culture is about that relationship building.
So without being culturally responsive in the work that we do, we basically have no rapport. So you basically need to know the people that you're working with and where they've come from. So our talk today is about being culturally responsive in the work that we do. We'll talk a little bit about our TC, what we've done to be culturally responsive, and the benefits that we have seen from doing that. And we'll also put a little bit of context about why being culturally responsive is so important. Just where we are, for those of you who don't know, we're down the bottom of the world, about 3 hours flight from Australia, and we have a population of 5.1 million.
So just to put it into context, we thought we'd just very briefly mention some of the history of New Zealand. So initially, New Zealand was a home of the Māori people. So we call them tangata whenua. That means people of the land. So they're our indigenous people. The 1800s saw European settlers arrive, and this resulted in a treaty being signed between the British monarch and between Māori tribes, and that was in 1840. So I know very similar to what India's gone through with the English coming in as well, and unfortunately, this also resulted in a real loss of Māori culture. Saw that through their lands being confiscated, their language was suppressed, their culture, identity, and their customs were significantly suppressed as well. And this can continue to be seen throughout all of our areas. So, for example, within health, within the education system, and within our work within the justice sector. So, as an example, we've got there, so Māori people make up 16 16.7% of the New Zealand population. However, within the prison setting, they account for 52% of the population. So that's a huge disproportionate amount. Now, in our particular unit, that number's even higher. So I think about last week, we were sitting on 60% of our unit identified as Māori, and then we had about 20% that identified as Pacifica people. So Pacific is all the islands such as Fiji, Tonga, Samoa, and we have a lot of island people in New Zealand as well. So 80% of our unit is comprised of Māori or Pacifica people. So hence, the real importance for us to be working in a culturally responsive manner that is going to keep them safe. So just very briefly, wanted to tell you a little bit about our unit. So our therapeutic community is a bit different in that we're not actually for alcohol and drugs. So our particular unit, we deal with two different programs. We have a program we run for men that are considered high risk of violent reoffending, and we also run a program for men that have sexually offended against adult women. So within the prison estate, we deal with the highest risk bracket. So that would be your top tier that are considered to be the most at risk of harming somebody when they're released, and that's our population we work with. We have a 40-bed unit. And as others have said, we're very lucky we have our own space within the prison. We have up to 4 groups at one time, and we'll have 2 facilitators that will run with that group the whole time that they are there. And our program runs over 10 months, but in total we have the men with us for about a year in total. And we also have ability to keep some on if they need a bit more time to stabilise. And it also gives us a chance to think about where to from here. Where's the next best step? Just one thing, I guess, to be aware of, we are part of, the department is funded by the state as such, by New Zealand government. With that, the aim of our unit is to reduce the chance of them reoffending when they get out, so reduce the risk of harm. So this is actually some pictures from our unit itself. Just one thing to point out, our unit is called Punatatiri. That is a name given by our local tribe, and it stands for Pool of Still Waters. And so we take that, our overarching theme in our unit is a time of reflection. So it's about them taking time to sit, to reflect, to look into that pool and to see how they want to change. Who do they want to be? What do they want their future to look like? So they're just some pictures. You'll see we have a lot of artwork. The art, the pictures and the slides are all pictures done by men in our unit. We do a lot of art alongside treatment as well.
Yeah, so further to that, our program is the best performing program in the prison estate, and it has been year on year on year. So it outperforms all other rehabilitative and reintegrative options in terms of reoffending. So looking at the type of clientele that we get, these are some of the men that we work with, the gangs that come into the unit. Because we work with the highest risk violent offenders in the country, they are predominantly, 90% in the violent groups, are members of gangs. And these are some of the gangs that we work with, and they're various different colours, and they're also often at rival gangs and at war with each other. So, and they're also a result of colonisation, in that the British colonisation basically stripped cultural identity about a couple of generations ago. So the use of the Māori language was prohibited in school, and everything to do with Māori culture was stripped away. So what we see here is the sort of advent of these indigenous gangs, and that is where they've found their cultural identity. Nevertheless, it's gang identity. And so what brings, so how do we manage that in the community? So the first thing that we need to do is when they come into the unit, they need to meet with myself, their therapist, and also mentors that are men themselves, people who have done the program, and the prison staff, and we talk to them about the community and what it takes. We talk about it being a living, learning environment. It basically starts from there. Every minute they're in the community, they're acting as if. So we ask these men to leave their gang metaphorically at the gate for the 10 months that they're with us, 10 months to a year that they're with us, until they leave. If they choose to, they can pick up their gang patch then. And we also manage gang stuff very strictly within the community. So if we see gang signs, gang tagging and tagging, which means graffiti, or gang influence, that is addressed with the men themselves, through their therapists, with the case management. Sometimes the mentors sit in that case management, and then those men are then accountable to the community for their actions. So then they do some reflection, and then they present that back to the community to talk about their behaviours. So it's quite a process. If there's sort of transgression, and the mentors and the older members of the community basically encourage and shape that behaviour. So here's a definition of cultural responsiveness that Jess and I came up with. So we believe that being culturally responsive is recognising the importance of culture in our everyday work, understanding cultural differences, and facilitating opportunities to celebrate and respect cultural identity and practices. So some of the ways we've been ways of building a culturally responsive TC, so just go through some of them that we've done. And you can see there below, it's quite heavily edited due to privacy reasons, but that's our kapahaka or performing arts group. Establishing connections with our clients, our wider family, their tribe and their support networks. So bringing them into the treatment journey at various times. It's been very difficult in COVID, but the use of Māori language in everyday client group and community work. So every day we'll be hearing the local language or te reo in the community and in our work. Making time in the therapeutic community for cultural activities. So it's performing groups, weaving, traditional weaving, making traditional attire available, working alongside our local tribe who have cultural rights and kaitiaki to the cultural services in the land, working alongside them so that they are also involved in the rehabilitation of the men.
So we've just got a few more different ways that we as a unit attempt to be more culturally responsive with our clients. So one, obviously, with our particular mode of therapy, we do a lot of CBT, so cognitive behaviour therapy. We've got schema, DBT dispersed within our program. But alongside that, we also are trying to incorporate Indigenous models of mental health. We talk in New Zealand about braiding them together. We call it kind of the braided rivers approach. And it's entwining and having both sides working alongside. So we've got the Western psychology, but we've got the Indigenous models alongside. And it's about bringing them together. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It's about being able to have both. Because of the importance of culture within New Zealand as a whole, we have what we call cultural supervision. So like you might have supervision for your treatment, we have supervision as well for purely cultural factors. So they will check we are working in a way that is culturally safe with our clients. They'll support us to maybe work through cultural differences, give us ideas about how we could work with a client to understand where they're coming from. So that occurs on a fortnightly basis for our whole treatment team. We also have in the process of hiring a cultural practitioner. This is somebody working full-time to work with the men to support them to develop their own cultural plans, identifying goals that they want to work on. What do they want to learn about their own culture? And that could be any culture, but it's a chance to provide them with opportunities that alongside the treatment they'll get in group and in the individual sessions and other things we run, that they'll be able to build their cultural knowledge as well. We also work really hard to make sure we're having lots of different events that celebrate and recognise different cultural events and ceremonies. So a big one we do in our unit is celebrating what we call Matariki, and that's Māori New Year's. And it's a chance to come together as a whole community, custody, our therapy staff, our community members, and we all come together and celebrate. And that will include eating food that is culturally appropriate, doing different games linked into that the men actually are part of creating that day and running that whole day. We also really strive that while we're within a prison environment, is to try and make our environment as uplifting as possible. So as you'd hopefully see, we do a lot of artwork. Paul's mentioned things like our performance groups. We have various activities. We've got different gardens. We have a lot of gardens in our unit. The men are responsible for tending to them, and they really take pride in growing the gardens. We have basketball court and tennis and different activities, a gym that the men can use to make sure that they're getting all different aspects met. So this ties in with this next slide, which is actually just mentioning one of the different models of well-being, so of Māori mental health that we use. So this is called Te Whare Tapawha. And what it is just about is it's looking at our more of a holistic approach to our well-being. So we're looking at the 4 different areas there. So we've got the spiritual aspect, we've got family, we've got the physical. So physical is like, are we exercising? Are we sleeping okay? Are we eating all right? You know, all that environmental stuff. And then we've got the mind. So obviously our treatment does a lot to work with looking at the attitudes, supporting them with how they're managing anger, how they're working through all those things. And so what we want to include within our unit is opportunities where men can strengthen every single one of those areas up. So some of the other things, for example, we have within that is we have like a band. So we have a lot of musicians. So we have all the music instruments available. We have a unit band that performs and are very, very talented. So that's just one example of some of the things we also have for the men to do. I just want to mention too, I know Paul mentioned family is a huge part of what we do. One other thing we make sure we do is we incorporate family so that the men too can have opportunities to share their learnings with their family. They can update them on what's their plan when they get out of jail. What do they need help with? What do their families need from them? What's going to help their families to have them come back into their community, back into their home? And it's a chance to build more wider community support as well. So we'll just go to the next slide. I'm not going to go through this, but these are just some examples of some of the ceremonies we have. So like others have mentioned, when we had a formal welcome or like a graduation, we make sure these are done in a culturally responsive manner. The local tribe will run these for us, support us, but the men are also part of taking charge of that day as well and will take speaking roles or be responsible for organising the event, so we include them in all those activities.
So again, on this slide, just some of the art that the men do and the symbolism and related to therapy. Wider community engagement, we have a lot of people that come into our unit, volunteers, Toastmasters, art tutors, woodwork, and we also have bands and motivational speakers. This is an example of a band that came into our unit. It's a Samoan heavy metal band, and here is some of the men performing a haka, Samoan haka, for them. Men give back. It's community outreach. You can see here some tables I've built for a local kindergarten, some library boxes, and there the last slide is some table tennis boxes for an Oceania. And some of the benefits of a culturally responsive TC that we see is certainly the safety of all members in the community. We turn up to work, we're very safe at work, and so are the men. That's their feedback. We reconnect with people with their culture, and above all, we are fortunate enough to have a program that is highly successful in terms of reducing reoffending. So to finish, I'll just quote a Māori proverb. He aha te mea nui o te ao, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. What is the most important thing in this world? It is the people, it is the people, it is the people. Kia ora.